Good evening to everyone and welcoming you all to the second day of our 5-day international virtual workshop on research writing, editing, and publishing, jointly organized by Lavender Literary Club, Cape Comorin Trust, and Malaysian Industrial Relations and Human Resource Associations, Malaysia. So today we have three speakers, and our first speaker is going to be Dr. J. Jehosen Jiresh. Dr. J. Jehosen Jiresh is an assistant professor of English at Rice Academy Institute for Advanced Studies, Bangalore, India. He has a PhD in English language teaching from Kamraj University. In addition to this, he is also pursuing a PhD in English literature from the Central University of Tamil Nadu. He is also having a certificate in teaching English to speakers of other languages from the Trinity College London. His area of specialization in research include the teaching of English speaking skills and learning oriented language assessments, reading in the age of watching, critical reading and watching. He has published 11 research articles in the international peer-reviewed journals and has presented research papers in international conferences in India, UAE, Singapore, Malaysia, and Hong Kong. He has delivered more than 25 invited lectures and conducted workshops on topics pertaining to English language teaching, literary theory, and film and literature. We are very happy to have you among us, sir. Handing over the session to you.
Thank you, Madam, for the introduction. Good evening, scholarly audience, organizing committee, and colleagues present here in this virtual gathering. I take this opportunity to thank Lavender Literary Club, Cape Comorin Trust of India, and the Malaysian Industrial Relations and Human Resource Association for giving me this opportunity to share my ideas with this scholarly audience. Before starting my talk, let me share my screen. So this is the title for discussion this evening, significance of reading in research writing. When I chose this topic fairly a week ago, or a couple of weeks ago, when Dr. Joyson spoke to me, I'm not ashamed of sharing the fact that I stumbled upon this idea when it comes to research writing. And I thought of my own problems as young researcher trying to write research papers, understood the significance of reading research works, reading in general, that comes in handy when we write. It's a well-known phenomenon or an accepted idea that reading contributes to writing, and the more we read, the better we become as writers. So I'm going to share with you things, that I understand. I come across the problems that I faced during my research writing, or how reading plays a vital role in shaping our research acumen or enhancing our research skills. So this is an experience-based talk that with which I aim at inspiring young researchers and other fellow colleagues here in this platform to take up reading more seriously in terms of enhancing our research writing skills. To start with a few points to ponder upon. Okay. So reading at the first place, we are at the crossroads of thinking about reading in a very important manner. This is one area of concern As introduced, now I'm working on learning-oriented assessments in terms of language and literature. When it comes to literature, the domain in which I teach, English language and literature per se, the biggest challenge I find is there is lack of interest towards reading. So when at the age of watching, especially in 2016, a study in America spoke about teenagers' interest that is declining. Teenagers' interest towards reading is declining. Hence, they were called screenagers rather than being called as teenagers. So, at this context, it's our duty to insist on the idea of revitalizing reading, because we know that how reading is watching is no substitute to reading. At the same time, we should also view watching from a critical perspective. Being a student and teacher of cultural studies, I also understand the popular culture is behind watching, and if something reaches the larger audience, it's our duty to understand why they like it. So we should also watch critically. That also comes under preparing ourselves for research. Whatever text that comes to our purview, whether it is a reading material or an ad film or even a film for that matter, we should also watch critically. So reading critically and watching critically both plays a vital role, especially when it comes to reading. When we watch someone else's imagination, and when we read, the visualization takes place in our mind. This is a basic idea which even filmmakers tell their assistants to do. It's not about watching more films. If you want to become a filmmaker, read more text. That's something which they say, so that their creativity and critical thinking is enhanced. So the connect between reading and writing, it's something I was talking about at the beginning. We all know that a good reader becomes a good writer, and I don't see these two as separate activities, because even literacy, for that matter, is reading and writing. If a person can read and write, a person is considered literate. The ideas of literacy in the contemporary sense changes. Even Alvin Toffler talked about that a century ago, talking about the significance of learning, unlearning, and relearning. I don't see these two as different activities, rather as connected parts of the same whole. Because when you read, we reflect, we critically view certain texts, and then that contributes to our writing, which makes us understand the other phenomenon, that writing as a process. It's a common phenomenon that we discuss with our students, telling them that writing is not a product, rather it is a process. And to become better in a process, what are we supposed to do? It is practicing. Practice is something which comes to our mind, and there is a saying that practice makes things perfect. But in this context, I want to reinstate the idea that it's not about practice which makes things perfect. It's about practice that makes things permanent. When we continue to do certain things again and again, what happens? The habit becomes permanent. So if we practice in a wrong way, the wrong practice becomes permanent. So we got to be really careful when we start the process. So a good writing process starts with reading. When we go the other way around, we get stuck in between, because when there are two ways of looking at it. A few researchers, they start by thinking, few start by reading alone, and then they start writing a paper. Both these concerns, they have a different set of challenges. For example, if you read a lot but you don't think enough, you will end up curating or collecting existing thoughts, and there is no room for innovation. And if you think a lot and then we don't read, that's a major concern. We assume that we are generating new ideas, and at the end of the day, we'll be reinventing the wheel. And this is something which we do in terms of review of literatures in our writing. So this talk now will be on the importance of reading in research. And the major question to the teachers here, or the aspiring teachers, is that do we facilitate the research reading? Do we facilitate research reading? I was thinking about a phenomenon in the Indian classroom conditions, or in most of the developing nations, where we consume Western knowledge and we try to match our research productions to that of the Western world. The problem is we are mere consumers of knowledge, and at certain point in time, we expect our students to write originally, write research papers, which was not part of their curriculum during their UG or PG, where more postgraduate studies, where most of their writing is in the exam. In the exam is something to do with reproduction of content from one material to the other, and with a short span in between, where they store that content in the mind and then they reproduce that in the exam paper. So there is no scope for original writing till that point in time, and there is no scope for students to get used to reading research papers or articles, whereas we concentrate more on reading the primary text. And that too, when I spoke about the significance of reading in the age of watching, today's students, more often than not, they depend on summaries. Good students depend on internet summaries, and not so good students depend on those students who can retell those stories to them. That is the blatant reality in academia in general. Maybe I'm talking specific to English studies. This should be the case in other domains as well, where reading per se is dwindling, and people thrive by watching or listening. Is something which we understand in the contemporary context. So there is no scope for reading, and all of a sudden we expect our students to write original papers, and we also find fault with them for not being able to do so. So do we facilitate research reading is also a question which we should have in our mind. And with these ideas of revitalizing reading in the age of watching, the connect between reading and writing, understanding writing as a process, and to understand the importance of reading in research, which we'll talk about in more detail in the next few minutes today. And then with the major question, seminal question, do we facilitate research reading? Let's move on to today's point of discussion, the significance of reading in research writing. Here is the overview of my talk. We'll be quickly looking into the challenges in academic or research writing, and then advantages of reading research works. And finally, we'll spend some time in understanding the strategies and techniques and tips to hone effective critical reading skills, which would in turn enhance our research writing skills. So this is going to be the plan for this talk, the next 30 to 40 minutes. So the first one, as I told you, challenges in academic research writing. Okay, the very first thing when we think of writing on our own, we in a sense here I include aspiring researchers, teachers who are in the field of teaching for more number of years, or at the beginning of their career, where we are at the crossroads where the buzzword is publish or perish, and publishing has become the mandate. And to meet the mandate, we try different ways, few ethical, few unethical ways of publishing. I'm not going to talk about that as well, that at this point in time. But it all boils down to the idea that we are afraid, or there is some block when it comes to original writing. It's a kind of a folk understanding that whenever in a colonial country like India, whenever the Indian natives had complaints, no, they went to the British officers. They tried speaking to them. The first tool which the officers used, and the same tool which the teachers use even today, to dismiss the person from their presence, is give it in writing. Give it in writing. This is something which we have been hearing for quite a long time, even in our colleges or schools. When students have concerns, no, they bring it to the notice of the teachers or administration. The first thing which the people in power say is give it in writing. And maybe the theory behind it is to get it in paper, to get an acknowledgement of their complaint. But the practical implication is that when you ask them to write, obviously 9 out of 10 complaints will not reach you. People won't have the patience to write, and if so, they have to find someone who can write well and submit it to the teacher. And there are no grammar specific teachers who will find mistakes with their writing, and being afraid of that, people don't submit their complaints in writing. So there is a kind of inhibition to start writing. One of my teachers used to call this as white paper paralysis. The moment we are given a paper or a blank screen to write something, we stop at a point in time, and we don't have ideas, or we don't know the ways to continue writing. This is a problem we would have faced at least once in our writing career, if at all we tried to write on our own. Other means of writing, maybe we'll have sessions on plagiarism and research ethics, where those things will be discussed. So challenges in academic writing: the first thing, lack of knowledge related to the subject. Second thing, they are all self-explanatory: lack of critical thinking, lack of language competency, that includes vocabulary, grammar, spelling, and punctuation. And the more important thing, lack of knowledge with regard to format and style. And there is always a question, no, I do a research within this context which is locally relevant. Why should I follow a format or style that's been prescribed by mostly the Western agency? It's high time that we think that we should, developing nations, many have. I'm talking in terms of India, that we should develop our own research guidelines or research style sheets as well. That's for a separate discussion. But many creative people who have a lot of ideas, my friends I know, they struggle to write because of this last aspect. They find it difficult to format. They find it difficult to cite ideas, because the Western way of understanding a research paper is completely different. When we make a comparative study of Indian articles in general, and also the articles which we consider as the articles, that is the most authentic ones, there are striking dissimilarities. Citations in an ordinary Indian research starts from review of writing, review of literatures, whereas in good articles in Scopus indexed journals, we find citations starts from the very first line. Even at the beginning of this talk, I made few statements saying it's a well-known fact or well-known phenomenon. But academia, research academia, if you say well-known, how do you know, right? Is the question that is asked to you. So we have to state evidence for each and everything that we quote, unless or until we think that it is my own idea. So this is a serious concern for many original thinkers as well. So for all these challenges, now you would have understood the way to address these challenges or encounter these challenges. There is no better word than saying read. When we read, we address all these challenges. Lack of knowledge can be addressed with reading. critical thinking. More we read, more perspectives, multifaceted thinking. So we develop a kind of critical thinking skills as well. And there is an idea that speaking is acquired. Being a teacher of language, I'm making this statement. Maybe if there are teachers interested in language research can contradict on this idea. Thing is, we consider speaking is something which is acquired more often than not, but writing is something which we learn in the course of time. And there is a way to look into it. The better reader, the person who reads more, need not learn writing separately. We can also acquire writing, grammar, spelling, and punctuation for that matter. We can derive grammar, understanding from the principles of descriptive grammar. We may not know the rules. I'm not talking about teachers of English. In general, people writing English for that matter, they may not be aware of the rules of English. Rather, they can write authentic English without knowing the rules. There is nothing wrong about it, because their reading would have complemented, reading would have informed their writing. That's the idea. One such example I can give you is, in most of the studies, in the Indian context, we have English as a mandatory language, except for medical sciences, where there is no English instruction. But then doctors seem to develop their English language skills in a better way, because they read their subjects in English, they listen to lectures in English, and unconsciously they develop English language skills. So one can enhance writing skills through acquisition by reading. It's like you don't have to know how the car works, still you can drive. So without learning grammar, one reads a lot, can write well, write grammatically correct sentences and paragraphs with consistency. Your reading helps you to enhance that aspect of your writing without learning grammar per se. It's a statement which is open for discussion as well. So, and lack of knowledge with regard to format and style. This aspect, recently I started reading a lot of research articles, and that's the point where I put forth the idea that article reading, research article reading should be included in the postgraduate curriculum. When I say postgraduate, I'm aware of the fact that in the Indian context, earlier MPhil is a kind of Master of Philosophy is kind of invalid these days, and recent developments also suggest that one can do PhD with a 4-year undergraduate degree, which means I don't know about the future of postgraduate degree, but then in an in-depth study, in the new sense, if at all, at least at the 4th year of the undergraduate study, research article reading should be introduced, and it should come under mainstream assessment as well. I remember one of my teachers telling me that during the MA English program, he made a mention of this statement that I won't be happy if my students clear UGC eligibility exam for teachers with more marks. I won't be even happy when my students crack the IAS exam. But the purpose of MA English studies, which aims at creating scholar critics, even that we have a lot of problems. Students of mathematics become mathematicians. Physics students become physicists. What do English study students become? The purpose is becoming scholar critics. So the most happy movement for a teacher is not when the students crack NET or IAS examination. Rather, if a student can understand, read, understand, and respond to research articles of Q1 journals in his or her own domain, that is the achievement, or that is the ultimate purpose of completing a postgraduate degree in a particular area of specialization. So that's the way to assess our knowledge, assess our understanding of the subject. If a person can read, understand, reflect, respond, the top level journal articles in his or her area of study, that's where you see the measurable outcome, kind of an outcome of the knowledge that is being gained over the past 5 years of undergraduate and postgraduate study. So I understand that we should include article reading as part of our curriculum. This is one statement I'm making today, and for which it's not only about an individual. People in the publishing sector like Dr. Regin or Dr. Joyson would agree with me, because it's not easy for an individual to have access with all the top rated journals in one's field. That's where the institutions come into play. They can subscribe to the online databases through which their students can have access to the articles in their fields of study. Or else, as individuals, we can't subscribe to such journals because of their high-priced subscriptions. So with these ideas, we'll move on to the advantages of reading research works. I just told you it should be incorporated in our undergraduate or postgraduate study, depending upon the future of our curriculum. These are certain ideas I had in my mind in a vague order, and this Biotechnica lecture in YouTube, a pep talk in YouTube, and also a write-up helped me to frame these points in a sequential order. So, of course, it is addressing the challenges that we have listed in the previous slide: knowledge acquisition, continuous learning, that is knowledge updation, learning domain-specific vocabulary. English teachers and scholars would know the word register, meaning in the English language study domain, different set of words used in different spheres: judicial register, medical register, aviation register, set of words that are domain specific. We can also call it jargon or technical words that are specific to a particular field. For example, the word critical, we have a different meaning, but when it is used in a physics context, the nuclear reactor will go critical from next week, meaning it starts functioning. So different words get different meaning in different domains. So when we read research articles in our own domains, we get used to more number of vocabulary, more number of lexical words, wide range of lexes, which I think is more important than developing a native like accent or a native like pronunciation. Knowing more lexes is more important. I used to listen to theorists like Slavoj Zizek, a Slovenian native, has a typical Slovenian accent and pronunciation, but his vocabulary range, I would say, is twice as a native English speaker. He has a broader range than common native English speakers. Because in the knowledge understanding, the grammarians or people who can understand words are placed on top, because when we can understand words, we can interpret the world. That is the idea. So any field of study, to whatever domain you belong to, we have to enhance our vocabulary. Here I would like to, I'm reminded of an idea. One vocabulary master in the Indian context, apart from political identities, is one Dr. Shashi Tharoor. His vocabulary, of course, is better than many native speakers. We might view it critically for using complex words, but in more often than not, he uses right words at the right places. When a child asked him to give a word for the day, the word he gave was read. Since reading, the importance, since we are talking about the importance of reading, I'm reminded of this fact. He said, the word for the day is read. Reading is where you find words in context. You don't have to take a dictionary and by heart words to enhance one's vocabulary. Whereas when we read, we come across words in real life context, so that we can learn more number of words. And authenticity. Most of the research works are reviewed, and when it comes to good journals, we can have a minimum guarantee that they are authentic materials. And this is the important one. The next point, familiarize with format and style. So we get to understand how a research argument is developed, or how it is cited, referring to other sources. What is the significance of intertextual reading and the relevance of including references from other sources. So as I told you, we can acquire these skills when we read, when we continuously read research articles that is reflected in our writing, because there is no other mantra than this. Reading and writing informs each other, they complement each other, and they contribute to each other. And the next one, enhance higher order thinking skills. Of course, evaluate, analyze, and creating are the higher order thinking skills, which can be enhanced only through reading. So the other one, the most important one in my opinion here, is when students are exposed, or learners or researchers are exposed to reading authentic journal articles, research works, to comprehend, it enables them to comprehend the rankings, impact factor of various journals, and the idea about databases like ResearchGate or academia, where people can submit and publish their own research works. There are many of that kind. We'll have separate sessions on such things in the days to come as well. So what's the advantage of this aspect? When students are, when learners, researchers are exposed to the ranking and impact factor and structure of this functioning, they will escape predatory journals. They will escape the plague caused by cloned journals. When they are aware of the nuances of how rankings are given, what is H index, what is impact factor, they'll get used to it when they read such articles from such journals. And nowadays we find researchers, senior seasoned researchers getting cheated by people who run predatory journals or cloned journals for that matter. I would talk maybe predatory, meaning we talk about paying for publication. At least that was fine to an extent, where you can pay a nominal fee and then you publish it, and if your paper has got merit, you can publish that in ResearchGate or academia. You can get reads and citations. But the cloned journal, for that matter, is a scam. It's a scam, where these things, and those scholars who are published in such journals, they have a tough time. They can't even put it in the CV when it is proved by the regulatory bodies. So those writings goes waste. So when we are aware of journals and their ranking, their accreditation stuff, we won't be cheated easily. So for this reason also, learners must read articles from journals. And of course, collaborating with other researchers. As I told you, in academia, ResearchGate, when you publish, you can invite renowned scholars in your field of study to comment on your paper. And if they are interested in your research work, they might comment on it. And I know a few people, they have also collaborated with them in their future endeavors as well. And of course, well-known advantage, that is to find research gaps, which we call review of literatures. More reading helps is, and I told you about how without reading we might reinvent the wheel. So reading helps us in finding the research gaps and thus paving way for new research. So these are the advantages of reading research works, which would address the challenges of academic reading, academic or research writing. Extensive reading will make us equipped to write a particular research text on that particular domain or topic is my argument. That's the reason why I chose to talk about the significance of reading before writing. So I'm going to introduce, no, it's not about introduction. It's something I'm going to remind you of two key tools or strategies that we would have learned in our undergraduate studies as theory. How many of us have practiced that in our real life is a big question mark. And as teachers, we are teaching these techniques to our students to enhance effective academic and research reading as well. So I'm just reminding ourselves, including me, of these techniques which we can use during our reading to enhance the effectiveness of our reading of research works. Yes, we know about these techniques. Number one is SQ3R, skimming, scanning, going through the text to understand the main key points and then search for key ideas, and then we frame questions. That's where the research begins. Say, for example, even if we don't frame a proper question using the proper keywords, it would be difficult for Google to give us the right solutions. So it's always important to start our research with the right questioning, right? Read, recall, and review. And this KWL technique is something which I taught my students recently, thanks to a YouTube video which talks about know what to know and learn. These are techniques which individuals can frame on their own, or we might be following, participants here might follow a similar technique as well. This is if you are starting to read a book or a thesis, dissertation, or an article. With the title, we jot down things that we know about it. And then we also make another column of things which we try to know from reading this text. And then finally, we make a list of things we learned from the text. This is one way of making our reading a resource for our writing, KWL. Right, these are two simple techniques that we would have come across earlier, which we can incorporate in our research writing journey to prepare our fulcrum for the research, by asking the right questions to the text and to understand what I should know from the text. With that focus, when we read, that acts as a kind of an harness that would help us to derive the right information from the research writings. The next one, effective critical reading. Give me a minute, please. So here is a quote from one of the works that I read for this particular talk on the significance of reading while doing research. It's by Bartholomew and Anthony Petrosky. They talk about the idea that a reader in a critical reading context is not a passive reader who reads for pleasure, is not a reader who reads a story during a train journey to understand what has happened. Rather, is a reader who tries to interact with the author. The reader per se, he or she would sometimes start before the author. What would have happened before writing or after writing, even while writing, and this kind of interactive reading would in a classroom context would pave way to the ideas proposed by in the book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Pedagogy of the Oppressed. It talks against the idea of banking model, and talks about the importance of people negotiating, involving in an intellectual discourse with the text that makes classroom more vibrant, learning more vibrant. So it talks about how reader is a participant in the reading activity, critical reading activity. There are a lot of texts that would support this idea. Maybe John Paul Sartre's work on Why Write, where he talks about reader for whom the future is uncertain, because the reader doesn't know what comes next. So reader becomes a participant in the text as well. And the critical reader is often misunderstood as a fault finder. Rather, a critical reader here is a truth finder. And this truth finder will have suspicion as an investment. For any critical reader who uses reading to write, suspicion is our investment. And the evidence we get to prove our suspicion is the gain. Please have this idea in mind. Suspicion is our investment. We take everything with a pinch of salt, so that the evidence we gain to substantiate our suspicion is our gain. So we read not only for what is said, we read for what is not said, and if something else is said, why is it said so? With these questions, we read materials so that we become critical readers. So here is a checklist for a critical reader based on Zimilansky's idea. How well developed are the themes and arguments? We ask questions whether the arguments are substantiated, whether that's the reason why we find a lot of questions in the present UGC NET examination, where we find assertion and reasoning to find out whether the argument is well constructed, because it involves problem solving, it involves critical thinking skills. Did the theoretical perspective used to introduce any potential bias of the author? The author has any potential bias when he or she talks about a particular idea? Are we convinced with the interpretations presented, or do we have a different kind of interpretation? Are the conclusions supported firmly by the preceding argument? How appropriate are the comparisons that are used, the examples that are used, whether they are relevant? Can we compare these two entities? We have such questions. We should have such questions when we read. So each question would give you a problem. You can convert that problem into a research paper. Now we understand the significance of reading before writing. Did the response options or measurement categories or techniques used affect the data that were collected? This is how our thesis evaluators look into the thesis writing as well. Here we use it in the other published research works so that we can find research gaps. I spoke to you about the significance of research gaps. Such questioning will help us find the research gaps. And then moving on, ethical considerations, whether there is some kind of ethical questioning that should be asked to the text or to the researcher or to the research, whether it is adequately addressed, the idea of ethics being questionable at any point in time because it changes from person to person. So this is a short checklist which can be elaborate as well for a critical reader, because a critical reader reads with the suspicion. The suspicion is the investment and the evidence is the gain. Please have this in mind and try to interact with the reading material. Here I'm also reminded of one of the saying, my teacher used to tell me, but I do not know whether this is said by someone else before. I leave it to you. A library is a graveyard. This is the saying, which means books are buried and they are waiting for human touch. Only when there is human interaction, books get life. This connects to the idea of Roland Barthes talking about death of an author and birth of a reader. Only when the reader touches the book get life, or else libraries are mere burial grounds. So we must find ways of these kind to interact with the reading material. So critical thinking continued. I have summarized or maybe jotted down a point. This is chapter. Okay, is missing. Okay, as of now it's fine. This is from the chapter 10 of the Study Skills Handbook by Stella Cottrell. The following questions, they are based on the material from that chapter. Does the writing assume a casual connection when there may not be done? There may not be done, or any general conclusions can be drawn based on only a few examples. These, as I told you, these are questions which we come across during our Viva defenses based on our samples, or can you conclude based on these limited examples, some subjects, something of that kind, which we should imagine ourselves as external examiners and ask such questions to research articles or dissertations or theses. So hope you understand the sequence of this talk. We spoke about the challenges in academic writing. We found reading as the only way to address those challenges, to make ourselves better writers. So the techniques to make our writing a potential, reading a potential framework, so that contributes to our writing. We spoke about SQ3R, KWL, and the significance of critical reading, the significance of suspicion in our reading, and then we listed out checklists to enhance our critical thinking skills. And this is again from this book called Study Skills Handbook by Stella Cottrell, that talks about how to question research works. When I was going through this material in the internet, I understand this is what came to my mind. This is how external examiners question the research papers or research dissertations submitted to them for evaluations. So anyone who aspires to become a good writer must ask such questions to the research articles that they read. We spoke about the importance of incorporating them in our curriculum. So it's inevitable that we should involve research articles in our curriculum. How to read it? This is how it is to be done. Might there be other explanations apart from the one proposed? Are there any hidden assumptions that need to be questioned? Is enough evidence presented to allow readers to draw their own conclusions? Or does the line of reasoning make sense? Is there a logical idea behind, rationale behind the reasoning that the author has made? So this can be extended not only to research writing, but also to all the texts available around us. When I told you about text, I spoke to you about visual text as well, including advertisements or films or news items, YouTube videos or interviews. More often than not, they all play a vital role in framing our research questions or framing our research postulations. For example, from the cultural studies perspective, students of English language and literature, teachers of English language and literature studies would have read Mythologies by Roland Barthes, which is a study on advertisements, how advertisements create modern myths. He talks about the idea of foam, it's a nothing substance, foam, as an idea of sensual attraction and an idea of luxury, how myths are created. He studied advertisements to come up with this postulation in Mythologies, is a seminal work. So we can apply this kind of suspicious critical reading to whatever we see. Recently, yeah, of course, the IPL starts today. We find the overflow of learning apps and how they are earning these days. Baiju, for that matter, is a learning app which is sponsoring the Indian cricket team. And we might ask such questions as academicians. It's pertinent for us to ask such questions. Who are endorsing these learning apps? No, is it academicians? Is it the thinkers of the world, or thinkers at least in the Indian context, national context? We find I would be the last person to talk against the media narrative that is a film or even sports for that matter. But this is a pertinent question. Who is endorsing learning apps? Is it a learned person endorsing it? Is a question which can be a research problem. A student of media studies or cultural studies can take up and convert that into a research paper. So our reading should not confine only with research texts or texts that are printed, but to all the texts that are found around us, posters, brochures, advertisements, newspapers, and whatnot. So a researcher is one who is continuously questioning the existing idea. Only by questioning we have come thus far. The civilization has come thus far. Science has come thus far. Trading, commerce has come to this point. Thinking, philosophy has come to this point. Only by questioning and contradicting the ideas that were found earlier. So these are certain key features of the critical approach to reading. Please have it in mind. There is no predetermined meaning in the text. There is no, which means I have put that in the points to remember as well. No absolute truths. The text only presents ideas. Again, as a student of language and literature, I would like to quote Stanley Fish, a reader response theory theorist, Stanley Fish, who talks about interpretive communities who create meaning, readers creating meaning. A seminal work, Is There a Text in the Class, says once a text is given in a class, there is no one text. The text is equivalent to the number of students in the class. If there are 30 readers of the text, it gets 30 different meanings, right? So there is no predetermined meaning in the text. There is not something which is fixed in your mind. Rather, we read to evolve meaning. We negotiate with the text to get our own meaning. It is the readers who create meaning from the text. Thanks to the post-structural idea which is born after the deliberations of Jacques Derrida, who postulated that meaning is found in the reader. Meaning is not in the language, not in the writer, rather it is in the reader who perceives the meaning based on the socio-cultural, socio-political background of the reader. Each one understands the text from their own meaning. This holds good for all the narratives that are found in the world. Critical readers interact with the text with questions and dialogues with the text. And with questions and dialogues, this is repetitive. Yeah. Critical readers, they don't stop there. They relate the text with other texts. This is referential comprehension in reading. We would have heard about such global comprehension, local comprehension, inferential to understand, and then referential. Well, while you're reading a text, it should ring a bell that you connect that with several other texts that you have read, several other visuals that you have seen. So this is where a critical reader is multifaceted. We understand there is no predetermined meaning. I am going to derive the meaning from the text. With that perspective, we should read. It is the readers who create the meaning. And we interact with the text with questions and dialogues. And then we relate that with other texts that are found that we have read or visualized before. So reading, when I told you we should visualize the text while read, and while we watch, we should textualize the visual as well. So a critical reader in the contemporary context not only visualizes the text, but also textualizes the visual. So based on this, the points to remember here, text present ideas, not absolute truths. connect different texts, relate with different texts to evolve new narratives, convert your reading into writing. And reacting is different from responding. Emotionally reacting to the larger narratives that are found in our context, whether it is films. I'm not going to make it political at this point in time, whereas it's left to you, because reader is the meaning maker. Are we emotionally interacting or reacting to the films that we see or advertisements that are being shared in the social media? Are we responding to it critically, taking different things into consideration, taking the historical context into consideration? So this is that's how a critical reader is far more matured than the larger reader or receiver of visual or textual idea, who only reacts to it, and whereas a critical reader responds to it. And a critical reader would avoid binary responses, saying, do I agree with this statement? Yes, no. That critical reader will not stop with saying yes, no. Rather, they reflect based on their responses. They can't stop with the mere yes or no. I agree with this, I disagree with this. They don't stop there. Rather, they reflect with their own responses. So to become a critical reader, to become a research writer, being a critical reader is important. To become a critical reader, these are the things one should have in mind. So bridging reading and writing. While we read, how do we bridge reading and writing? Of course, modern tools, whether it is the modern writing, modern reading tools, Kindle or iBooks or whatever, no, we have a lot of techniques to highlight, note take around the margins. This is one book, which I'm reading these days. I used to highlight, or I hope you can see this, highlight and take notes around the margins. So these are the ways you can take notes alongside the margins. So this becomes a potential resource for you to write. Of course, the usual exercises of paraphrasing, summarizing, writing exploratory responses on your own, that would help you to minimize plagiarism as well, and at the same time evolve your own ideas. When there is originality, there will be difference. When there is difference, there will be innovation. So highlighting, note-taking, paraphrasing, and what is simultaneous double entry. This is one technique which I learned recently, where people use a kind of a two-column note-taking method. Where they simultaneously note down the quotes or points that are found in the text, and also record their own reflecting and responses to the text based on the other text they have read. They relate to the text, those things which we discussed in the previous slide. They note down the text that they have read, which are based on the ideas that are found in this text, so with which they make simultaneous compare and contrast of text that they have read and the text that they are reading, and the idea that they have and the idea that is conveyed using the reading of this particular text, which would help them to convert that into writing a new idea. So we are reading to innovate, because we are reading originally, we are reading with a difference, we are reading critically, so that we read to innovate. And in this process of reading and writing, it's always easy to get struck with boredom. So what one should do is, we should read with now or never urgency. And there is a peer pressure as well. All our institutions, all the going is becoming really tough. A PhD is not enough. You need more publications. So if we have that kind of compulsion, and along with choosing the right path for our research, let our research reflect our interest, so that we don't give up in between. So these are certain things that I wanted to share with you in terms of bridging the reading and writing, while reading, a well-read, critically well-read activity is half writing. Half writing. This is something I wanted to share with you. And finally, I have 2 book recommendations for those who find it difficult to start reading in the age of watching. Of course, I presume that all of us are good readers, spending quality time in reading. This you can suggest to others who find it difficult to read. The Pleasures of Reading in the Age of Distraction by Alan Jacobs. And about critical reading, this is the book I have, Read Critically by Alex Barata. These are the 2 books, along with this book, which I told you before, Study Skills Handbook by Stella Cottrell. So these are the 3 books that you can take note of from this particular talk. With this, I conclude. So what we have discussed is we understood the significance of reading even in the age of watching, where cooking tips, everything is visualized. Why reading is still important? Because when we read, we visualize. And when we watch, we textualize. So critical watching and critical reading is still important. Watching is just tip of an iceberg. The larger mountain is found beyond the sea, under the sea. So reading is more important. Challenges of writing. All the challenges boils down to the idea that if we read, we can address those challenges. So it is important to be a good reader. While reading, we make half of our writing journey complete with the SQ3R and KWL techniques. I also spoke about effective critical reading. As a person with suspicion, we read the text, we negotiate with the text, relate that with other sources that we have come across. We involve in a dialogue with the text so that we find problems, like an examiner who goes through the nook and corner of a research article or a dissertation. We ask questions to the research articles, which should be included in our daily curriculum, our mainstream curriculum. And we also spoke about the checklist for critical readers. And I'm just going through this for your benefit. And then we spoke about the key features of critical reading, how the idea is not present in the text, it is in the reader. We negotiate with it and we evolve the idea. And we don't react to text, rather we should respond to text. We should avoid binary responses and reflect on those responses. And I spoke to you about bridging reading and writing with these simple techniques. And I also introduced you to 2 different books, which many of you would have read by now. You can suggest these to your students as well. And yes, read, reread, reflect, and respond, so that in this process, we don't become a researcher overnight. When we start doing this in the process, we'll become effective researchers who can make a significant change in our areas of domains of study. Read, reread, reflect, and respond. Having read, we cannot stop without reflecting. Having reflected, we cannot stop without responding with writing. So let our reading end in a proper writing activity. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity again.
Thank you, sir. Now the session is open for the participants to raise their queries. Any participants who has any questions or doubts, may kindly unmute yourself and shoot your question, please.
Good evening, sir. This is Shahida from Guru Nanak Institutions.
Yes.
The session is wonderful, sir. Very insightful thoughts you have shared to us. Reading techniques, especially critical reading, is the most important one. As being an engineering faculty, we teach the students about critical reading. So all these days I was not aware of this critical reading. Now I got a complete idea of how to teach and how we can help the students to enhance their skills in reading techniques.
Okay.
And one doubt I have is the students are unable to concentrate much on reading. As you told, visualization is playing an important role. So how can we express that? I mean, how can we create a kind of interest in the mindset of students so that they try to concentrate much on reading rather than visualization, as
Yeah.
we don't have sources.
Okay. Okay. This is a tricky question which we all have in our mind. I personally don't read like my teachers, and this is a phenomenon that dwindles from generation to generation. And when I find my students not reading at least to the level in which I read, I find it difficult to fathom the idea that how would they succeed. The same problem which even my teachers would have had looking at me. When I say me, my generation in general, the way ahead is it starts from home. Maybe I'm talking in a very ideal note. Rather, no, I've seen English literature and language graduate students or who are parents now complaining that their children are glued to the mobile phones. They are glued to the screen. Of course, COVID has played a vital role as well. They have all their online interactions and classrooms in the visual platform or the virtual platform. They always complain about the students, and I'm reminded of one thing. It starts from the home. Reading, till now there are people who read, there are students who read, but the numbers are dwindling. The students who read more than their teachers are there. It starts from the home, because why I'm saying you this is, a parent should not worry that their children are not obeying them. Rather, they should worry that they are watching them. When we are spending more time on TV and our gadgets which we have, how can we expect our next generation to take the book and read?
Exactly. Yes, sir.
It's something to start from the home. And if at all there is lack of education at the home level, at the larger public perspective, it's important for the government policy makers to introduce libraries at all parts of uh, the country or the world in general, and expose them to the new novel ways of reading. It's not about physical books alone. This small gadget holds more than 1,000 books now, so they can still read. And one of my friends from Delhi University who worked with me, a 24-year-old boy, he has read more than 3,000 books. And it's not a lie. I know him personally, and he belongs to this generation. He has more than 7,000 books in his Kindle, and that's how it is, because his parents read. That's something which I found. And teachers, we should walk with the textbook, and teachers must show the students that with reading what they are capable of. So that would have an effect on the students, and we can facilitate them by introducing readable texts at the beginning, asking them to read about things which they like. And I know students who are interested in cricket started following cricket commentary, written commentary in ESPN Cricinfo. Since that visualization was so interesting to them, they still have it in one hand even when they are watching. They want to see how a wicket or a six is described in this writing. So reading is not irrelevant. It's about how we show them why reading is important. Parents, teachers, and society in general.
Yes, sir. Definitely. Your answer is relevant, but it should be implemented.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
Easy to
Yes.
say than.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Ma'am, if you're teaching critical thinking skills to engineering students, one person I'm reading recently is Edward de Bono on lateral thinking. He has written a lot of books. I learned about him in a most unconventional setting. While watching Big Boss, the host introduced Edward de Bono on Teachers' Day a couple of years ago, and that's the point when I started reading about Edward de Bono. You can also read about his contributions to the world of thinking, lateral thinking specific terms.
Edward D. Bono, sir.
Yes, yes.
Yes, sir. Definitely. Thank you, sir.
Anybody has any more questions?
Good evening, Jiresh.
Yes, sir. Yes, Dr.
Oh God. Jiresh, actually, you have it is a wonderful section. You have told about okay, the scholars or okay, students should read articles in their PG and okay research time. Okay,
Yeah.
you just talked about Q. Okay, what are the journals we want to read? Okay, Q1 journals also from Scopus. Okay, but the thing is, okay, now okay, many of the scholars even and even the faculties are going for the predatory journals, paid journals for publication, and
Mm,
when these people are going for predatory and paid publications, okay,
mm,
these reviewers of the journals, they never go for review. And okay, there are a lot of errors in their sentence constructions and everything is there. So that if the students go for reading that articles, okay,
mm.
they also they just think that okay, their writing is very good and they just to co-opt with that writing.
Fossilization
Yeah,
of errors.
like you said.
Here is
Yeah,
where
like you said. I'm not blaming
practice
about the
makes
research
this
scholars.
permanent.
I'm blaming about the faculty also. They are also supporting the scholars to go for the predatory journals, paid journals, and all. And the most of the journals of the predatory, they never go for the review. They never see the sentence. They never go with that. Okay, so that okay, I just in the present era, mostly near the 50% of the scholars going for that.
Mm.
And even the faculties of even deemed universities or whatever universities maybe they are going for that. Okay, when these people go for writing like that, and when the people are suggesting to go for reading that kind of articles, and what the benefit, what the outcome come, if there is a wrong, if the sentence construction is wrong, they think that okay, these are the scholars from that universities and we just go with that, okay, what they have written is right.
Mm.
So that for this, okay, your suggestion.
Yeah, two things I want to reflect on this based on two things. Number one, when mandatory becomes the mandate, what happens? There is a, if you permit me, can we take 5 more minutes for our discussion? So 2 more minutes.
Yes.
This is a story which I read recently. Once there was an emperor in Delhi. He was facing a menace due to lot of snakes in the city. So in order to stop it, what he did was he said, each one, if you are bringing one snake, one dead snake, I'll give you 1 rupee. And people were enthusiastically giving, but the menace still continues. There are more number of snakes in the city. He didn't understand how come it is people are giving it daily, but still snakes are still there. Because it is the people know who became really vigilant, they found a wonderful way of earning. They started breeding snakes. Knowing about this, the emperor, no, he said, no more reward. I won't give any money, even if you bring dead snakes from today. The more annoyed people know, they believed in this guy. They thought if we are giving him dead snakes, he will give money. They started breeding. Now that this person has stopped it, they got annoyed and they left all the snakes on the streets. Now the problem became more worse than the previous thing. So a stupid solution to a problem will cause more trouble. That's the idea from this story. I want to relate this with the present scenario. When mandatory becomes the mandate, this is what happens, Dr. Joyson. You and I, we can't, we are not policy makers to talk about these issues. When you say you have to publish this many papers, you have to be a PhD, and I see 3 dimensions of teaching these days. Administration, that comes first. Number 2, if at all there is time left than administration, do some teaching, and compulsory, do some research. So I see these 3 these 3 responsibilities in a traditional setting. In a department, you will find people who are good at one of these 3. One who is good at timetable, one who is good at documentation and things. That person is not so poor in teaching, right? Teaching is a prerequisite. That person will take care of administration. and there will be people who's good at research. They will do only research, and they don't that doesn't mean that they don't compromise on teaching. And there are great teachers without an MPhil or PhD. They were great teachers. And now that private universities or even in the government setup, it goes on record, but still I make the statement, people want everyone to fire from all cylinders. That is, you should be a good administrator, doing all clerical job, quantifying data, and then you should be a teacher, and also you should be a researcher. And what will people do? This is the reality, blatant reality that is in front of us. This is point number one. Point number two, in 2010, when I had my UG candle lighting, the then principal of the college, the American college, made a statement in the candle lighting. He said, you are stepping into the age of mediocrity, where people will not only accept mediocrity, rather they will celebrate it. Because a real talented person, if he or she is celebrated, then it means that I am celebrating him, I am lower than him. So if I celebrate a dummy, no, I can stay on top. So people will celebrate mediocrity. This is the age of mediocrity. We can't deny the fact that this is how there will be mediocre publications, there will be mediocre teaching learning process, there will be there. But how to react to this? We can't correct the whole system. Yeah, the IPL is going to start. I like this person called MS Dhoni. He always says there are two things, controllables and uncontrollables. If there is rain and the nature of the pitch changes, I can't control it, which is beyond my control. Controllable, my bowlers can bowl without bowling extras. These are controllable things. So that's what I believe in. I spoke about all this. I'm tired of this. What I would suggest is Herman Melville in his work, What Will Be the Scrivener? He says, this is how the world goes. Only thing I can do is I would prefer not to. I would prefer not to go with the flow of this. I would prefer not to pay money for my job. I would prefer not to sell, not to find unethical means to add up to my publications or whatsoever. Only thing I can say is I would prefer not to. This might sound foolish to the larger world, larger political context. I cannot trust these ideas on my friends, relatives. But only thing I can say is I would prefer not to. And how to expose our students to better writing, that still the responsibility, even in the technical era. No technology can replace teachers. Only teachers who don't use technology will be replaced by teachers who use technology. This is again, once my guidance supervisor made a mention of this. So we must use technology. Good teachers, if we have a civic responsibility, educational responsibility, expose your students to better knowledge. Expose your students to better ways. And don't force it. It's up to them to take. They are all more matured. They know. They ask, no. Since we have spoken in a more candid way, I say, students say when people talk about academic excellence, when people talk about reading, they say, at the end of the day, teaching job is sold for 50, 60, 70 lakhs. What's the point in reading? That's what students ask these days. These are not things which are asked by lay people. So you introduce students to the possible perils and advantages of academic excellence. Let them choose it. And another thing I would like to conclude with this, we can never force this on students that you should do this. We can never do that. Let them choose it. We just expose them to what is good and what is bad. That's the thing I wanted to say. So it ends here. It's the responsibility of the teachers to find the right source. In the age of Google, we can't say anything which is not found in Google. Rather, we have the responsibility to orient them and find better knowledge. For example, better, sources, authentic sources that rests with the teacher. Yes, Dr. Joyce.
Thank you, Jiresh.
Yeah.
Okay. One more thing I want to ask. Okay, what motivated you to do second PhD? Because you are very young.
Second PhD. Okay. Yes. This is okay. If we have time, I did my first PhD in ELT. That's because when I was studying, I had many students, friends who are from rural backgrounds. Though we had great teachers who can teach literature at a different level. They found it difficult to grasp what is happening in the class. That's the reason why I chose ELT for my first research. And once that was over, my love for literature, literary theories didn't leave me. That's the reason why I wanted to do a PhD on literature now. That's what I'm doing now.
Okay, thank you, Jiresh. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody has any more questions? So, thank you very much, sir, for giving us a very useful session and telling us a lot about reading and motivating us to read. Thank you very much for joining us, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you, organizers, again for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.